Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my July reading wrap-up. Alright, so for July, I actually ended up reading 15 books, which is pretty good. I think most of that reading was actually from the Summerween readathon. That was the first readathon I ever did, and it really made me more accountable for my reading. So I ended up reading a decent amount of books that week. I think I read 5. And then from there, I reread a series in preparation for a new book that just came out. So there's a lot of thrillers on this list. There's a lot of YA fantasy. There's some regular fantasy. There's some romance fantasy. And there's a couple adult, I think there's one adult contemporary. So that being said, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday. And if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram. It is linked down in the description below. With that being said, let's get into this list. Alright guys, so similar to all my other wrap-ups, I'm going to sort this out by genre. If there is a specific genre you're looking for, please check down in the description. I leave timestamps for everything. So the first book, I actually reread a series in preparation for a new book coming out, and that is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. So I absolutely loved this book. You can check back. I have a lot of videos recapping this book. It's great. If you're a fan of enemies to lovers, this is for you. It follows Lou and Reed. Lou is a witch, Reed is a witch hunter, and through some comical circumstances, they end up getting married, and they pretty much just have to learn to deal with each other, and there's a very interesting magic system that I found very fascinating. Overall, I love this book. However, Blood and Honey by Shelby Mahurin, the second book in this series, I despised, and I disliked it even more on my reread. I'm just not a fan of this book. I feel like it changed the characters. It was very much dealing with the emotions of the two main characters and some of the side characters. There wasn't quite as much action. I felt like transitions were kind of weird. I just didn't love this one. So I did start Gods and Monsters. I have not finished it, so I'm not going to feature it on the wrap-up. However, I'm so far liking it much more than Blood and Honey, so I have high hopes for this series as a whole. I will definitely be doing a recap video on Gods and Monsters once I finish it. All right, moving on to romance fantasy. So the first one I read was For the Wolf by Hannah Whitten. So this follows Red. So in her village, there is a girl. The firstborn is for the throne. The secondborn is for the wolf. So every, I think it's like 50 years, 100 years or so, the second-born daughter of the queen is sacrificed and given to the wolf. And Red, the main character in this, is that second-born daughter. So she has to travel through this dark wood that is just described so beautifully, and it's so eerie and creepy. It's very, very well done. I compared this to Uprooted in another video. I think that if you enjoyed Uprooted, you'll 100% love this. Personally, I didn't like Uprooted, and I still really enjoyed this. But Red ends up going, she meets the wolf. Obviously, the wolf isn't exactly what she thought he was going to be, and the wolf teaches her how to use magic, and they develop this relationship. While this is going on, Red's sister is becoming the queen, and she's very upset over everything that's going on, that she lost her sister and all of these horrible circumstances, so she starts figuring out a way to get Red back. So you're following these two dual perspectives, and it's just done so well. The slow burn romance in this is everything, and the magic is so cool. The wood is just described beautifully. I could not recommend this book more. I've already started rereading it because I love it so much, and I can't wait for the sequel. So definitely check this one out. All right, the next romance fantasy is actually a series, and I talked about it in my summer book haul, and that is The Zodiac Academy by Carolyn Peckham and Susanne Valenti. So I'm going to take you guys back to what I said in my summer book haul. From there, I think this is going to be a very good time. I believe there are multiple books in this series, so we'll see how I feel about this one. So far, I'm like lukewarm on how I feel about it, but I think it's going to get better. It got better. It got so much better. I'm obsessed. Like, it's really bad the amount of obsessed I am with this series. I have read 4 of these books in 6 days. And if you can tell, they're pretty big. So let's get into the series. I am going to do a full review on this series just because I want to gush about it. But it follows 2 twin girls. So we have Darcy and we have Tori. Now, Darcy is a little bit more reserved. She's the quieter of the 2 girls. She's still pretty feisty. She has like blue-tipped hair, and she still has an attitude. And then you have Tori, who's very rebellious and steals motorcycles and is just a badass. So they are both orphans and they are 18 years old when one day this professor comes and tells them that they're actually royalty and they're also fae. So there is a school known as the Zodiac Academy that'll teach them how to be fae, how to use their powers, and they also have this huge inheritance. So these two girls don't really believe him, but they do need money, so they go with this teacher and they find out that they are the Royal Vega siblings. So when they get to the school, they find out that not only do most of these fae possess elemental powers, but the Vega twins possess all elements. So there's water, fire, earth, and air. And typically you possess one power or you possess two if you're really lucky. They got all five. So they are just super powerful off the bat, even though they really don't know how to control their powers yet. Unfortunately, there are these celestial heirs. There are these 5 guys that each are very powerful in one of the 5 elements, and they're the ones that are supposed to take over. Everyone assumed the Vega twins were dead. So they're kind of upset that these 2 girls have come in and are going to try to rival their place on the throne. So it's a bullying romance, and obviously you can kind of guess what happens. The heirs and the 2 Vegas kind of go at each other, but they also start to have these slow burn romances, and it's so good. I've heard this called a reverse harem. It is 100% not reverse harem. Also, it was described as smutty Harry Potter or spicy Harry Potter. There's not a ton of smut in this at all. Really not until you get to the 4th book, and even then it's pretty tame. If you read Sarah J. Maas, I feel like her stuff is way more vulgar than what's going on in the Zodiac Academy. I love the story, I love the magic, I love the world building. I mean, these books are very, very long, so obviously there's plenty of time to build a very immersive world. But definitely, if you're a fan of Sarah J. Maas and you want like a fae series that you can just get sucked into, I would definitely check out the Zodiac Academy. And next up, I read 2 books by Katee Robert, who is slowly becoming one of my favorite romance authors. The first one is from the Wicked Villain series, and that is Desperate Measures, and this follows Jasmine. So if you're unfamiliar with the Wicked Villain series, it's if the villains ended up with the princesses, and they're pretty smutty romances, but I really enjoyed them. I loved this one. So Jafar ends up getting Jasmine as his like prisoner, but they've kind of always had a little bit of a crush on each other, and they get into some like BDSM moments. But while this is going on, Ali is actually this evil bad guy who's trying to kidnap Jasmine and possibly kill her, torture her. He just wants her in order to claim the throne. However, Jafar actually kind of loves Jasmine. So it's their story. These books are very, very short. I don't know if my camera's gonna focus. There we go. The books are very short, they're very fast reads, and I very much enjoyed them. I really like Katee Robert's writing. Unfortunately, the next Katee Robert book I wasn't a huge fan of. It's actually one of the DNFs on this list, and that is Abel. And this is I think it's a mafia romance, maybe. It follows Abel, who is one of 7 brothers, and their father was killed, and now they're seeking revenge. So they go to this big gathering of all the different like mafia groups or different groups, and it's during the Feast of Lammas, I think, and you're able to battle opposing leaders in order to gain brides. So they do that, and I think throughout the series you're following different brides. However, this one follows Abel and the main leader of the other group that I forget the name of, and then his girlfriend. So it ends up being like this group of 3 that end up being married to each other, and during this marriage they have like a year of peace. Overall, I just didn't love the story, I think because I like fantasy romance, and this was more just like romance, not as much my thing. I need there to be some like fantastical elements or like some sort of magic for me to be really gripped, and this didn't really have that. I don't know. Personally, I think if you're a fan of Katee Roberts, you probably will like this. I think that if you like romance, especially if you like mafia romance, enemies to lovers, you might really enjoy this. This was interesting, however, it just personally wasn't for me. All right, so now I'm gonna move on to horrors and thrillers. Most of these books I read, like I said, during Summerween, which is great. Olivia reads a latte and Gabby reads. You guys did a phenomenal job of hosting. I can't wait to do this again in the future. So these are the books I read. The first one, unfortunately, was also a DNF. This is the second DNF for this list. That is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. However, I think I would have enjoyed this book if I finished it. In the very beginning, I'm not even gonna get into the plot because I did not get far into this book at all. There is 2 instances of animal death and or torture. I can't deal with animals being hurt. It is just such a pet peeve of mine. And this is like the minorest spoiler. I think I was only like 30 pages into this when I put it down, just because I was afraid it was going to keep happening, and it just really takes me out of a book and I can't stand it. I'm a complete wimp when it comes to that. For some reason, I'm totally fine hearing about people being murdered. I don't know what that says about me, but I can't do dogs being hurt or any sort of animal being hurt. So I ended up putting this down. However, I have heard amazing things about it, and I really didn't give it that much of a chance. So definitely don't let my opinion stop you from reading this. I think it actually is a very enjoyable book. And one day, when I get a bigger backbone, maybe I will pick this back up. But overall, it just wasn't for me. The next book was actually my favorite book I read during summer weed. It was so good, and that is Horrorstor by Grady Hendrix. This follows a girl who is working in retail at essentially an IKEA, and her life is kind of in a lull. She's not really going anywhere, and one day she goes into work and she realizes that someone has vandalized the store. So her hiring manager asks her to spend the night so they can figure out if someone is breaking in or what's really happening. So when she spends the night, crazy stuff starts to happen. There ends up being a seance. There's just all of this insane stuff. I can't even describe it. You can watch my summer ween reading vlog when I read this and like talk about it in real time, because it is a wild, wild ride, and it's insane. It's once again one of the best horror books I've ever read, and the pacing is insane because it starts off so chill and like very easygoing, and yeah, there's a couple creepy elements, but nothing like insane. And then shit hits the fan, and it's just absolutely out there. I love this. I read this in audio format, and I also read this following along in the book, just because there's some really cool visuals, like the different IKEA Bork items, and then there's like creepy imagery, but then there's also really creepy music and awesome narration that goes with the audio format. So I definitely suggest checking out both. I love this book so much. Highly recommend if you're a fan of horror. And piggybacking off that, I actually ended up getting a bunch of Grady Hendrix books that I want to read. I want to read his whole backlist. So I read his newest release, and that is The Final Girl Support Group. Unfortunately, I didn't love this one quite as much as Horrorstor. This follows a bunch of girls, or a bunch of women, who were the final girls. So it kind of has a lot of references to like classic horror movies. So it's all these different women that survived murders, or a group of people being murdered. So there's a girl that was at a summer camp and all of her friends got murdered, and she was the final girl. There's a girl that was babysitting and I think someone gets killed. So all of these women meet together and have this discussion until someone starts trying to kill off all of these final girls. I liked this. I think the pacing suffered a little bit. It's very slow paced. It takes a while to get into. It does have Grady Hendrix's like graphic imagery. Like, he describes disgusting things very, very well. And it definitely has that. And I like the callback to classic horror movies. Personally, I think it was just a little too slow for me. I wanted it to be a little quicker paced, and I wanted it to be a little bit more frightening and more gripping to start out. So it does take a while to get into. There were some really cool twists in this. I did enjoy the ending. Overall, it was an okay book for me. Next up are 2 Riley Sager books. So the first one I loved so much, and that is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. This follows a girl that was at a summer camp when all of her cabin mates disappear. So she's grown up her whole life kind of being traumatized by that event. So she becomes a painter and starts drawing her cabin mates everywhere, and is just kind of like skirting with reality. She's having a lot of like psychological issues. So one day, the owner of the camp comes to her and says, "Hey, we're reopening this camp. Do you want to come?" So for some reason, she decides to go to deal with this trauma, and a bunch of different events take place. It goes from there. The ending of this book was insanity. I think I'm typically pretty good at guessing twists, just because if you read so many different thriller books, there's kind of a formula. So this book, I did not guess anything that happened. I was completely wrong, and I love that. I love this book so much. So definitely, Riley Sager is an amazing horror thriller. I haven't read any books by them that I didn't really enjoy, so definitely check this one out. Next up, we have Survive the Night by Riley Sager. So this follows a girl who, after the death of her parents in a car accident, goes to live with her grandmother. And her grandmother is obsessed with like these old-time movies, and this becomes her coping mechanism. So when she is very anxious or very stressed, she begins to see movies in her head. And these movies kind of like glamorize what's going on around her. So she is able to live a pretty functional life. She ends up going to college until her roommate is murdered. So now she decides to go back home to try to deal with this trauma. And she doesn't drive. So she ends up hiring a stranger off a notice board to drive her home. So when she gets in the car with the stranger, weird things start happening. However, we don't know if it's the movies in her head because she's a little bit unreliable, or if this guy's actually acting very suspicious. So it goes from there. I very much enjoyed this. I will say I enjoyed the first 3/4 of it, and then the ending was a little out there for me, but it was very cool. I very much enjoyed the references to all of these older movies, and it's Riley Sager. So it's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be really good. So if you're a fan of Riley Sager, you're gonna love this book. Next up, we have Hairpin Bridge, and this is by Taylor Adams, who's the same author that wrote No Exit, which is one of my favorite thrillers of all time. This is following two different sisters, so it's Lena and Cambry. And unfortunately, at the beginning of the story, we find out that Cambry has committed suicide by jumping off Hairpin Bridge. Now, Lena is a blogger who hasn't talked to her sister in a long time. However, she doesn't believe that she would commit suicide. So Lena goes to investigate and discusses with the cops and all of the people that saw Cambry on that day. So it's two different timelines. We're following Cambry on the day she was killed, and then also following Lena as she's trying to figure out what exactly happened with Cambry. And I did overall end up enjoying this book. However, I will say the first half of the book was very boring. This definitely suffers from some pacing issues. If I wasn't reading this book for a readathon, I probably would have DNF'd it. However, the ending was superb. I love the ending. The ending very much reminded me of No Exit. You could tell it was written by the same person. But the beginning is very, very hard to get through. So if you're patient and you're willing to get through that beginning, I think you will overall enjoy the book. Personally, I don't think I'll ever reread it. I didn't feel the same way I felt about No Exit. However, it was still overall a pretty good read. All right, guys, those were all the books I read in July. Thank you so much for watching this wrap up. If you've read any of these books, please let me know down in the comments below what you thought. Did you like them? Did you hate them? I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye.